In 1956, the Hollywood industry was facing unprecedented challenges. Television sets were becoming fixtures in American homes, stealing away moviegoers who once flocked to theaters. Studios desperately fought back with bigger budgets, wider screens, and more spectacular productions. But this high-stakes gamble didn't always pay off. Behind the glamorous premieres and splashy marketing campaigns lurked a darker reality: mounting production costs, dwindling ticket sales, and executives sweating over balance sheets showing millions in losses. Let's dive straight into it and talk about the 13 biggest box office disasters from 1956. Foreign Intrigue should have been a guaranteed hit. Robert Mitchum, one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, headlined this European spy thriller during the height of Cold War tensions. Audiences typically devoured tales of international espionage, especially with Mitchum's rugged charm leading the way. Director Sheldon Reynolds insisted on filming across multiple European locations: the French Riviera, Monaco, Vienna, and Stockholm. These exotic backdrops sent the budget soaring to $625,000, an enormous sum for what was essentially an expanded version of Reynolds' television series of the same name. Mitchum himself pocketed $150,000 of this budget, but even his star power couldn't save this meandering thriller. The plot followed his character investigating his mysterious employer's death, uncovering a web of blackmail tied to former Nazi collaborators. Critics complained about the film's pretentiousness, calling it an unsuccessful attempt to mimic better spy thrillers like The Third Man. The oversized budget, combined with disappointing ticket sales, made Foreign Intrigue one of United Artists' most regrettable investments of the year. While Mitchum continued his successful career, this misfire marked a troubling sign for United Artists' financial stability. When Warner Bros. Greenlit Santiago, they believed they had all the elements of a successful adventure film. Alan Ladd starred as a gunrunner supplying Cuban revolutionaries fighting against Spanish rule. The story promised exotic locales, dangerous missions, and plenty of action. The production was plagued by historical inaccuracies so glaring that Cuban educators formally complained through diplomatic channels. The film depicted historical figures who had been dead for years as still alive in 1898. Warner Bros. Invested heavily in creating an elaborate jungle set at their backlot, spending a staggering $125,000 on this single production element. When key action sequences still had to be filmed off-screen due to budget constraints, audiences noticed the corner cutting. Ladd himself was a major problem. Once one of Hollywood's most reliable leading men, his career was in decline by 1956. His wooden performance lacked the charisma needed to carry such an ambitious production. Critics noted the film suffered a serious failure to involve the audience. So complete was Santiago's failure that Ladd's own production company distanced itself from the film. It was rarely re-released or transferred to home video formats, making it one of Warner Bros.' most forgotten investments and a significant financial blow. Fritz Lang, the visionary director who gave cinema classics like Metropolis and M, found himself directing pedestrian thrillers for RKO Pictures in the twilight of his American career. While The City Sleeps featured a murderer terrorizing New York City while journalists compete to solve the case first. The film boasted an impressive cast, including Dana Andrews, Rhonda Fleming, George Sanders, and Ida Lupino. Lang's distinctive visual style was still evident, with shadowy cinematography and psychological tension throughout. RKO Pictures, once a powerhouse studio that had produced Citizen Kane and King Kong, was in its death throes by 1956. The studio's financial troubles meant minimal marketing support for Lang's film, effectively burying it before audiences had a chance to discover it. Critics who did see the film recognized its quality, but this critical appreciation didn't translate into box office success. While The City Sleeps became one of several Lang films that contributed to RKO's financial collapse, the studio would release its final films that same year before being sold off and dismantled. Lang, disillusioned by his treatment and the commercial failure of his later American works, would soon return to Germany. While The City Sleeps stands as a testament to what might have been had RKO been able to properly support this influential director, MGM had every reason to expect Bhowani Junction would be a hit. The film starred the gorgeous Ava Gardner, one of Hollywood's most bankable leading ladies, alongside respected actor Stuart Granger. Based on a best-selling novel about India's struggle for independence, it promised romance, adventure, and timely political commentary. director George Cukor seemed the perfect choice to bring this ambitious story to life. MGM spared no expense, sending the entire production to Pakistan for extensive location shooting. This decision proved disastrous from both financial and logistical standpoints. The production faced endless complications abroad. Extreme heat damaged equipment and sapped energy from the cast and crew. Political tensions created security concerns. Each delay drove the budget higher, with costs skyrocketing beyond initial projections. When the film finally reached theaters, American audiences struggled to connect with its complex portrayal of Anglo-Indian identity and political unrest. The nuanced take on colonialism was perhaps too sophisticated for 1956 audiences seeking simpler entertainment. Critics praised Gardner's performance, but the film's box office fell far short of recouping its inflated budget. MGM, already struggling with the industry-wide downturn in theater attendance, absorbed a painful financial hit. The Bold and the Brave had all the ingredients for success. Mickey Rooney delivered one of the finest performances of his career, earning an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. The war drama told the compelling story of 3 American soldiers in Italy during World War II. The answer to its failure lies largely with RKO Pictures' crumbling infrastructure. By 1956, the once mighty studio was in its final days, with limited resources for marketing or distribution. The Bold and the Brave received a muted release, playing in fewer theaters with minimal promotional support. The film's production, while not extravagant by Hollywood standards, still represented a significant investment for the struggling studio. But without proper marketing muscle behind it, even Rooney's standout performance couldn't drive sufficient audience interest. The timing was also unfortunate. By 1956, World War II films had been flooding theaters for a decade, and audience fatigue was setting in. Without some spectacular new angle or massive star power, war dramas struggled to stand out from the crowd. Rooney's career continued despite the setback, but the film remained relatively obscure compared to better-known war pictures of the era. As one of RKO's final underperformers, The Bold and the Brave contributed to the studio's demise. Paramount Pictures had every reason to expect The Mountain would summit the box office in 1956. The adventure drama starred Spencer Tracy, one of Hollywood's most respected actors, alongside rising star Robert Wagner. The premise seemed perfect. 2 brothers attempt a dangerous climb up the Alps to reach a crashed airplane. Director Edward Dmytryk brought considerable prestige to the project. The film featured breathtaking location shooting in the French Alps, with dazzling Technicolor vistas of snowy mountain peaks that should have wowed audiences seeking spectacle. The production faced numerous challenges from the start. Filming in the harsh Alpine environment proved more difficult and expensive than anticipated, with weather delays and logistical complications driving up costs. The physical demands took their toll on Tracy, who was already in his mid-50s. When the film finally reached theaters, audiences responded with indifference. The story's psychological aspects, exploring the moral conflict between the brothers, may have been too subtle for those expecting straightforward adventure. Paramount had invested heavily in the production, but The Mountain failed to recoup its budget. Its disappointing performance represented another blow for a studio system increasingly struggling to predict audience tastes. The film quickly faded from theaters and public memory. Few films from 1956 demonstrate the gap between artistic achievement and commercial success better than Bigger Than Life. Directed by Nicholas Ray, this psychological drama starred James Mason as a school teacher whose personality transforms dramatically after being prescribed cortisone for a serious illness. The film was decades ahead of its time in its unflinching portrayal of prescription drug addiction and suburban dysfunction. Mason delivered a tour-de-force performance as the increasingly unstable Ed Avery, whose cortisone abuse leads him to megalomania and threatens his family. 20th Century Fox expected the combination of Mason's star power and Ray's growing reputation to deliver solid returns. Instead, they got a commercial disaster. 1956 audiences, seeking escape from their own suburban realities, recoiled from the film's disturbing examination of the American family's fragility. Critics were similarly confused and dismissive, failing to recognize the film's groundbreaking qualities. Reviews described it as melodramatic and excessive, completely missing Ray's intentional subversion of domestic drama conventions. The financial failure damaged both Ray's and Mason's relationships with the studio. Decades later, the film would be rediscovered and hailed as a masterpiece by critics and filmmakers. But in 1956, it represented nothing but red ink on Fox's balance sheet. Fritz Lang's Beyond a Reasonable Doubt marked the end of his American filmmaking career. The film starred Dana Andrews as a writer who deliberately frames himself for murder to expose flaws in the justice system, only to have his exonerating evidence destroyed in an accident. On paper, the film had strong commercial prospects. Andrews and co-star Joan Fontaine were recognizable, if somewhat fading stars. The premise combined courtroom drama with noir suspense, elements that had proven commercially viable. RKO Pictures, in its death throes by 1956, gave the production a modest budget that showed on screen. Critics noted the film's B-movie look and feel despite its A-list director and cast. The restrictive budget meant limited location shooting, with most scenes taking place in courtrooms and offices. Audiences found the plot contrived and implausible, while critics complained about the stilted dialogue. The New York Times dismissed it as a deranged adventure drama, hardly the reception RKO had hoped for from a Lang film. The film's box office failure was officially noted in industry publications, becoming another nail in RKO's coffin. For Lang, the disappointment was the final straw. Disillusioned with the Hollywood system, he returned to Germany shortly afterward. Robert Aldrich's war drama, Attack, deserved a better commercial fate than it received in 1956. The film featured an extraordinary cast including Jack Palance, Lee Marvin, and Eddie Albert, telling the story of American soldiers dealing with a cowardly, incompetent commanding officer. Unlike many war films of its era, Attack presented a stark, unglamorous view of combat and military hierarchy. Aldrich refused to soften the story's edges. The film depicted American military leadership as sometimes corrupt and ineffective, radically different from the heroic narratives that dominated post-war cinema. United Artists backed the production with a reasonable budget, but they miscalculated the public's appetite for such a critical portrayal of the military. Just over a decade after World War II ended, many Americans preferred nostalgic or triumphant war stories. The timing couldn't have been worse. Attack faced competition from more traditional, star-studded war films and historical epics with massive production values. Despite critical acclaim for its authentic portrayal of combat, the film struggled to find its audience. The financial disappointment didn't derail Aldrich's career, but it represented a significant loss for United Artists. The studio had been increasingly willing to back more challenging films, but Attack's poor performance reinforced the industry's growing conservatism. Gene Kelly's Invitation to the Dance represents one of Hollywood's most ambitious artistic experiments, and one of its most financially disastrous. The film featured Kelly both directing and starring in 3 distinct dance sequences without dialogue, using only music, dance, and mime to tell stories. MGM initially supported Kelly's passion project, allowing him to film across international locations with a cast of world-class dancers. The production wrapped in 1954, but then something revealing happened. MGM refused to release it. For 2 years, the film sat on a shelf while studio executives debated how to market such an unconventional production. They recognized that a film without dialogue, consisting entirely of ballet and modern dance, would be a tough sell to mainstream audiences. When Invitation to the Dance finally received a limited release in 1956, it earned a mere $200,000 in the US and $415,000 internationally, catastrophic figures against its production cost. MGM calculated a staggering loss of $2,523,000, making it the studio's biggest financial failure of the year. Kelly later acknowledged the film's commercial limitations, noting that the public wasn't ready for a serious dance film. The movie that was supposed to elevate dance to a new artistic level instead became a cautionary tale about artistic ambition outpacing commercial viability. United Artists believed they had an epic hit on their hands with Alexander the Great. The historical spectacle starred Richard Burton as the legendary Macedonian conqueror, with a supporting cast including Frederick March and Claire Bloom. Everything about the production was designed to impress, from its massive battle scenes to its lavish costumes. The film's budget reflected these grand ambitions, ballooning to approximately $4 million, an enormous sum for 1956. Producer-director Robert Rawson spent lavishly on location shooting in Spain and elaborate battle sequences featuring thousands of extras. When Alexander the Great finally marched into theaters, the result was far from the triumph United Artists had anticipated. While not an outright disaster, its box office performance fell significantly short of recouping the massive investment. Critics were lukewarm, praising the spectacle while criticizing the stilted dialogue. Several factors contributed to the film's underperformance. Despite his talent, Burton wasn't yet the massive star he would later become. The historical subject matter lacked the emotional connection audiences sought in entertainment. Alexander the Great represented a troubling trend for studios in the mid-1950s. The escalating cost of competing with television through lavish spectacle meant that even a film that performed respectably could still lose money, reshaping Hollywood's creative landscape. The Conqueror stands as perhaps the most notorious miscalculation in Hollywood history. Producer Howard Hughes spearheaded this historical epic starring John Wayne as Genghis Khan, possibly the worst casting decision ever made. The production cost a staggering $6 million when the average Hollywood film cost less than $1 million. The problems began with the screenplay, which reimagined the Mongolian warlord as essentially a Western hero on horseback. Wayne himself recognized the absurdity, reportedly saying, "I'm going to play this as a gunfighter." A bizarre approach to portraying a 13th century Asian conqueror. Hughes compounded the casting disaster by filming in Snow Canyon, Utah, not for its resemblance to Mongolia, but because it was convenient. Unbeknownst to the production, this location was downwind from Nevada nuclear test sites. The radioactive fallout would later be blamed for the cancer deaths of many cast and crew members. The film premiered to poor reviews but managed to become the 11th highest-grossing film of the year, still far short of recouping its massive budget. Critics savaged the movie, with Time magazine writing that Wayne portrays the Great Conqueror as a sort of cross between a square-shooting sheriff and a Mongolian idiot. The Conqueror's failure accelerated RKO's financial collapse. Hughes, embarrassed by the film, reportedly bought all existing prints for $12 million and refused to allow it to be shown on television for years. Not every box office disappointment of 1956 remained a financial failure forever. The King and I, starring Yul Brynner and Deborah Kerr, eventually became recognized as a classic musical, but its initial release represented a significant financial concern for 20th Century Fox. The production spared no expense in bringing the Rodgers and Hammerstein Broadway hit to the screen, the lavish sets recreating the Royal Palace of Siam, hundreds of elaborate costumes, and the technical challenges of filming in CinemaScope pushed the budget to $4.5 million, an enormous investment. Fox expected The King and I to follow the blockbuster success of previous Rodgers and Hammerstein adaptations, but when the film opened, ticket sales fell short of these lofty projections. While not a flop in the traditional sense, the film initially struggled to recoup its massive budget. Several factors contributed to these disappointing initial returns. The story, focusing on the relationship between a British schoolteacher and the King of Siam, lacked the romantic resolution audiences craved. The exotic setting, while visually stunning, may have seemed too unfamiliar to some viewers. Unlike most entries on this list, The King and I would ultimately find financial redemption. Multiple re-releases over the years, combined with television broadcasts and home video sales, eventually made the film profitable. Brynner's iconic performance won him an Academy Award, and the film has since been recognized as one of the greatest movie musicals ever made. The box office disasters of 1956 tell a larger story about Hollywood's painful transition during a turbulent decade. As television stole away casual moviegoers, studios responded with bigger budgets and more spectacular productions, a strategy that often backfired. These financial miscalculations had lasting consequences, contributing to the demise of RKO Pictures and forcing other studios to become increasingly risk-averse. Yet, not all was lost. Some of these commercial failures, like Bigger Than Life and Attack, have since been rediscovered and appreciated as artistic achievements ahead of their time. Others, like The King and I, eventually overcame their initial disappointments to become beloved classics. As we look back on these films from nearly 7 decades later, we can appreciate how these commercial failures ultimately shaped the industry. The lessons learned from these costly mistakes influenced Hollywood's approach to budgeting, marketing, and creative risk-taking for generations to come. Perhaps the most important lesson is that box office performance isn't always the final verdict on a film's worth. Sometimes, the most interesting stories happen when ambitious filmmaking and commercial success fail to align, creating fascinating failures that continue to captivate us long after their initial disappointments have faded into history.